everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of MOJO Rising, How to Make Cancer Suck Less. And this is an episode that I hope will help you change the way you heal. Because I have invited my soul sister, my friend, my partner, and my fellow cancer thriver, Jennie Smith, to join me because the two of us have done what many people have called a miracle. But it is a lot of hard work and dedication and strategic thinking and strategizing and negotiating. And so we wanted to bring some of these skills and what we've used in our journey to survive stage 4 cancer to you so that you have the same tools and processes that we use to really change your life. So without further ado, Jennie, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, it's good to see you again.
Oh, I'm just so happy you're here. And so, Jennie, I know that this isn't the first thing you've done today. So talk through what investments have you made in your health yet today?
Well, if you guys are watching this versus just listening, I just got back from a workout. So I was like, I'm going to do a podcast with Julie and I'm going to be sweaty, but I'm doing this workout for me because exercise, honestly, it quite helps me with my emotions. It helps me with just some time to think to myself. And then obviously it builds a lot of serotonin and dopamine. And I need that for the day to get all the things done that we get done as humans on a daily basis.
I couldn't agree more. And Jennie, first thing I did this morning was go and do the same thing, because if I don't start my day getting my body moving, and again, let's remember, guys, I was 140 pounds heavier. This was not part of my world pre-cancer, but post-cancer, heck yeah, if I get my body moving, my lymph nodes all express, I jump on the trampoline for a minute, like my day is different. So, the first thing when we think about how to negotiate, invest in you and bring your best self to the conversation and to the process, because you've got to build the foundation to you feel strong enough to actually start to invest in yourself as well.
I think too, and I don't want to get on a philosophical level, but I think to some extent, a lot of us, and I don't know, I'm in my late 40s. So I came from a generation that if we invested in ourselves, it was selfish, right? And then we kind of moved to this new cultural outlook of hey, I have to invest in myself to take care of myself so I can be healthy and take care of others. And so I think we're starting really to come to the understanding of if we don't take care of ourselves, we can't take care of the people that we love. So it's really important, put your mask on first. It's okay.
It is not selfish to put your mask on first. It is self-preservation to put your mask on first. Yeah.
That's exactly. Yeah.
So, okay. Well, Jennie, I know when I started my journey, I was in the perspective that when you go to your doctor, they are a god and they know everything. And part of what I wanted to start this conversation with is to humanize doctors. And so I think one of the first things I would say is, I absolutely believe doctors are magnificent, smart, caring, compassionate, thoughtful, amazing human beings. But we can only hold them accountable for what they learned in medical school and the research they have access to. Would you agree?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. So the first thing is I want to take the doctor off of the pedestal and put him in the passenger seat, because you are driving this car and no one else is driving this car. You get to decide when to brake. You get to decide when to go. You get to decide when to put gas in your tank. All those decisions are yours and yours alone. But your doctor is riding passenger seat. So I want to make sure that's the first thing we talk about is we very much respect our doctors. They are part of our team. They are not the leaders of our team. They don't tell us what to do. They don't tell us how to move. We do all of that. Right, Jennie?
Right. That's 100% right. I think we look at doctors, to your point, they walk in the white coat. We know they've had a ton of education. They are experts in their area of study and what they do. But I always bring up the example to friends that I talk to. You're not going to go to a podiatrist if you have a heart problem, right? So our doctors are educated in very narrow, very deep and specific areas. So we can't expect the doctor label to be an all-encompassing thing, right? And I agree with you. I have some phenomenal, wonderful, compassionate, amazing, educated, savant-like even doctors that I appreciate their expertise in the specific area that I know they're educated and trained in and have experience in.
That is exactly right. I was thinking about it on my walk this morning, and I was thinking you wouldn't go ask a carpenter about a plumbing problem. It's just the thing that you just wouldn't do. And so we have to understand what our doctors are experts in and what they're not experts in. And I do want to underscore, and I know Jennie would say the same thing. There are doctors I have in my team that I would lay in the middle of the road and die for. my nurse practitioner, I would do anything on this planet to help her because I love her truly from the core of who I am. So this is no disrespect to them. But there is a way that we professionally work together that has gotten me the outcomes I've achieved. And that's what we want to do is say, know who your doctors are and trust and respect what they are experts in, but know what they're experts in and know how to negotiate with them. And if you do, you will have better outcomes. Would you agree with that?
I would agree. I think we need to treat our doctors like consultants, right? They are consulting with us on any given topic about our health, right? So you would go to a nutritionist for nutrition, you would go to an oncologist to know how to kill cancer, right? But you might go to a functional medicine doctor because you want to get to the root of why you developed cancer. Your oncologist wasn't trained in how to do that. They were trained in how to kill the cancer, but they weren't trained in how to discover why Jennie got cancer, why Julie got cancer. So I do believe that, we need to appreciate what they're great at and where their expertise lie and how they were educated. And I think understanding how they were educated is important because that gives you exposure to the information that they might have available to consult with you on.
That's exactly right. And so part of my work was I went and studied medical school curriculum. And I went and studied what they learned as part of their education. And then I honestly really looked into what can I hold them accountable for? Because my frame of reference for everything is industrial psychology. It's what I'm an expert in. And so I thought if I understood what they went to school for, I'll understand what I can hold them accountable for. And your oncologist is responsible for treating or killing cancer cells. They are not responsible for making sure you live a long and happy life after cancer. They're not making sure of what the root causes are. And their responsibility is not to make it suffer less during cancer. They don't want you to suffer. And if they know tips that'll make it suffer less, they'll happily share those. But it is not their job to say, here's the secondary strategy you put in place so that these medicines don't impact you. That is not their job. Their job is to kill cancer cells. So let's be very clear. So when you're negotiating, the first very step of negotiating is understand who you're negotiating with and what their frame of reference is. Everything they're going to do is to kill cancer cells. So don't expect them to be in there negotiating and no other thing. So the first thing I would say is understand their job, understand their constraints. And most of their constraints are what your insurance company will pay for, and understand their compensation model and how they get paid for how you get services, how they get paid for how you get chemo, how they get paid for how you get radiation. All these things are important to just start to get the baseline to understand anyone you're negotiating with. It doesn't matter if that's your doctor or the roofer who's going to come put a new roof on your house. Understand their job. And when you do that, you're going to have a much stronger negotiation. And Jennie, I know I should have started the beginning to say, both of us have careers as executive in sales.
That helps. That helps a lot. Yeah.
It helps a lot. So when we think about why we're experts in fighting cancer, that's one of the reasons I'd say we're experts, because we know how to assess a situation, how to negotiate, how to understand how to make it win-win. That's part of being a sales executive, wouldn't you say, in your professional experience?
Yeah, I would. And I would also say that I think what I learned in sales and where I think it made me good at it was I became an extremely attentive listener. Because sometimes when you listen, you don't only hear what they're telling you, you hear what they're not telling you, right? And so I think inherently, as I would listen to statements, whatever that statement was by my doctor, I would immediately have a question in my head like, where did you get that information? How do you know that? Did you experience that? Did you read it? Can you share that information with me? Just because that's part of who I am as well.
So I was watching a master class on negotiation, and in preparation for this, because I wanted to make sure I was bringing my A game to the podcast. And one of the things that they suggested is it's something called mirroring, where you ask the last question. So if they say something like, you should do chemo, I should do chemo. And when you mirror the last thing they say back to them, they're going to give you more details. So that's part of this, of understand where they are. And I think that's like what you just said, of listening and understanding and gathering all the intelligence and what their perspective is and what their frame of reference and what they want. Get that out on the table very early,
And even just sometimes asking, and it's really difficult. Like, I think, Julie and I can both appreciate any cancer patient. You're in the moment. You've been told you have a possible deadly disease, right? The word cancer strikes the fear into the hearts of just about every human on the planet. So we completely sympathize with the fact that right at that moment in your mind, you're not going to think about sales tactics, right? In trying to get the information that you need from your doctor. But the good news is, and I don't know, I don't want to give a number, but I would say it's a very high percentage of cancers are not so fast growing that you have to make a decision right there the day of the moment that you're told you have cancer. You have time. And I know that's not every time. I'm not saying a blanket statement, but for the majority, you have time. So it's okay to kind of go through those moments of shock, and fear comes with that. Anxiety comes with that. There's a lot of complex emotions that we all go through when we get told that. But it's okay to take the time to absorb the information first, think it through, and then start formulating your conversations and questions with your doctor.
It's not only okay, it's necessary. You have to process the emotion, and it is scary. And guys, for all of you listening, I was just sharing with Jennie before we started recording. I got a call that scared the hell out of me last week, just last week. The same trigger of why I had cancer showed up again. So I'm not going to tell you, I got that phone call that, hey, your iron's low. And I was like, oh, hey, yeah, let's go have some dinner that night. Hell no. There were moments of pure panic. There were moments where I was like, it's okay. And we need to process those emotions. Those are real. And bottling them up creates cancer. So have the emotion, feel it, express it. But then immediately there was about an hour or two where I sat there staring at the wall thinking, do I have this in me again? What's going on? I've got cancer. What's it? All the fear. And then I was like, okay, how am I going to prove or disprove my theory? What's the data I can pull? Who's the team I'm going to pull? Start to mobilize. What do I got? And so it's, again, process the emotion. But then once you've processed it, start to become your best advocate and your champion, because you are the pilot, you are the driver, you are the everything in this journey. No one can do it for you.
And I think that's a whole podcast in itself, just on all the emotions that you go through and how to go through those emotions. I've always been a 7 on the Enneagram, and emotions are tough for me, but I realized holding all those emotions in were actually physically harming my health. So I think that's even a whole separate conversation in itself.
That totally is. Okay, so the first thing, we wanted to kind of give you guys some formula and steps for how do you begin to think about how you negotiate. And we think of negotiation as like a hostage situation where they're in there. But it took a long time before they started the conversation for them to have this negotiation and understand how. So it doesn't matter if you're negotiating for your car or your roof or your life, whatever it is, you walk into that negotiation knowing something. When you go to negotiate a new car, you've looked at Kelley Blue Book, and you've looked at the retail value, and you've looked at all these like gas mileage and all these data points. But you walk in to decide your cancer treatment, and they say chemo, and you're like, okay, done. No. Let's do the same amount of research if you're going to buy a car as if you're going to choose how you're going to save your life. So that's the first thing. So some of the ways in which I really value doing research was talking to survivors, hearing their stories, understanding what they had done, what they hadn't done, what they wish they had done, what their strengths and weaknesses were. So I gathered a lot from talking to people who had been through this before. And that was one of the best ways that I started to understand one of the levers I could pull to create a different process that was better for me. Jennie, what would you say was really helpful kind of in the beginning for you to start your research?
Yeah. So I'm an avid reader. So immediately, as soon as I got my diagnosis, I started diving into the details of that diagnosis. But then I also realized, with the consideration it was my second rodeo with cancer, is that cancer is extremely complex. So I knew that just by talking to other individuals that had had cancer themselves, no two people and no two cancers were the same. And I think this is the exact reason why we don't, and I know there's some theories out there, we do have a cure for cancer, and that may be possible. But as of today, here in the United States, I do not know of a cure for cancer, a silver bullet that we all can do that equals the same outcome. So I think what I realized was, when I went to my doctor may suggest, whatever the treatment plan is. However, knowing the complexity that every single person and every single cancer is different, that in itself told me this is an art, not 100% science, right? Because these doctors are using their clinical experience, they're using clinical data that they have available to them. They have a small toolbox of things to offer. So I really just started doing the research on my type of cancer. And then I started really digging into research on me. I started getting blood work done. I went to a functional medicine doctor and said, hey, okay, what are some of the things that are going on with me that maybe create an environment where cancer can thrive? So for me, it was both. It was both talking to other survivors that had been through it, and then it was reading a lot.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I feel like I read and watched YouTubes, and I mean, I was like nonstop around, and people would try and like, they're like, "Do you want to talk about cancer?" I was like, "I don't have time to talk to you. This is like, I need to get as smart as I can. Like, I'm fighting for my life. Like, I don't want to be kind." So it was like, I totally appreciate that voracious reading. And you're right. This is not, it is not an X plus Y equals Z. It is not that situation. It is a situation where I wanted, like, what I understood is I had one strength, and that was industrial psychology. And I wanted to use that strength so that I could understand exactly the team members I could use to flesh out my strategy. And so you're right. I started to look at research, understand the options that existed. And so one of the ways I did that was by talking to people outside of the US. How do you heal in Turkey? How do you heal in Belgium? How do you heal in China? What are the ways in which it's different? Because I wanted to understand those global expectations and what was alike and what was different around how people around the globe healed from this disease.
Yeah, 100%. I know you know this portion of my story, but I ended up going to Mexico and getting treatment at Hope for Cancer in Cancun. And so I sat with people from all over the world that were there in Mexico getting the same non-toxic therapies and modalities that I was getting. And they all had their own stories. It's kind of like if you're going to climb a mountain, you're not just going to like throw on a backpack and start climbing. You're going to go to a Sherpa. You're going to figure out what you got to pack in your backpack, right? So you want to talk with others who have done it before.
100%. 100%. And that's, to me, all part of this, of figuring out exactly how you prepare your body and what you can do. And I'll give you one quick example of the global norms. So when I was going through treatment, my second oncologist had said, no, chemo is the right approach. We need to do chemo, even though I'd had genomic data and I didn't think it was because I was KRAS positive. So I trusted, but I was skeptical. And so I started to do blood tests outside of my oncologist. And for me, and for everyone has different markers. And for some people, there aren't markers, as we've discussed, Jennie. But for me, CA19-9 was a great indicator early on. And I was able to get baseline markers that showed it was really elevated in my situation. So when I started chemotherapy and the marker went up, after the first chemo, I was pretty skeptical. After I did the second chemo session, it went up again. I thought, this is an indicator I'm chemo resistant. And so I went to my oncologist and said, listen, I believe I'm chemo resistant. And he's like, Julie, CA19-9 is not something we look at in the US, so I'm not worried about that. And but I had already done my research, and I knew that there were 6 other industrialized countries that use CA19-9 as an indicator. And so I was able to say, thank you so much, doctor. But these 6 countries use this as a marker. It's been a great indicator for me. It's listed on cancer.gov. So I need you to pull data to disprove my hypothesis. And I don't know that many people would have done the research to understand where this data point was used, to mark the data outside of themselves, or to feel confident to know what other data could prove or disprove this hypothesis. But I walked into that research, or to that discussion, knowing all of my options well before that, so that we could negotiate to find the answer. And the answer was to pull more data. But that's the example of, like, use your global norms and understand the options that exist to gather the data or to prove the point that you think you need to prove.
Yeah. And I can even give a real life example. So the first time I was diagnosed with cancer, which was back in 2016, I visited 3 different oncologists and was given 3 different treatment plans, right? No 2 chemos were the same. No 2 treatment plans were the same. So that in itself told me there is just not a one size, one way, this is what all the doctors are going to say that are experts. And I went to MD Anderson and UT Southwest and Texas Oncology, very wonderful educational hospitals that know cancer, and still was given 3 different options. And so as I did my research, like you did, a good example for me with my doctor was I had listened to the John C. Levy podcast discussion with Chris Wark, and he was talking about high dose IV vitamin C. And so I started down the rabbit trail of learning more about high dose IV vitamin C. So when I was given the direction that I should do chemotherapy, I said that I wanted to continue on doing vitamin C. And I think I may have just said vitamin C. And immediately my oncologist was like, absolutely not. There are studies out there that show antioxidants can prevent the chemotherapy from working. And if you're going to do chemotherapy, you want it to work. So please do not take any antioxidants. And I was like, oh gosh. So what I did was I said, okay, thank you so much. Can you please share the studies that you're talking about with me? Could you email them to me? And what I found was the studies that she was quoting from was oral dose vitamin C. It was a different type of vitamin C, and you could never orally take enough vitamin C to do what a therapeutic level could do through an IV without being completely sick. You would be nauseous and have diarrhea and all kinds of problems. So it wasn't a surprise to me that what she had read was probably true. That was an accurate study. Unfortunately, it was not done on high dose therapeutic levels of IV vitamin C. So
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So it's almost insane to me when they say no in those moments. And I had to have the same conversation. So let me walk you through my conversation, because I think this is one that happens quite a bit. I went to my oncologist and I said, okay, we're preparing for the chemo. You're saying I have to do chemo. And I said, okay, well, here's my deal. And I've been working with an herbalist. And as you guys know, Oscar, and I was like, and here's the supplements I'm taking. And my oncologist was like, I'm not going to fight this fight. So I'm going to go ahead and have the nutritionist come in here to talk to you. And then I'm going to have the pharmacist come in to talk to you. And both of them walked in and said, you can't take supplements. And I said, okay, cool. So where did you go to school and what'd you learn about? And the nutritionist had some data and the pharmacist had some data, and they were really strong. And so when we talk about this, we think there are 6 toolboxes: pharmaceuticals, botanicals and nutraceuticals, diet, lifestyle, environment, and other healers you can use. When I went to my nutritionist, they understand diet. When I went to my pharmacist, they understand pharmaceuticals. Who understands botanicals and nutraceuticals? Not your nutritionist, not your pharmacist, not your doctor. That's a different expert. So I did the same thing where I said, okay, give me one research article, one single research article that any of these things will contraindicate my chemotherapy. And they came back with 0.
same.
So that would be the first major tool I'd put in your pocket of show me your data. Like, ask them to prove to you why what you're suggesting is wrong. A simple no is not enough. You want them, if they said no about a pharmaceutical, you're damn right I would listen to them. I would walk away and stop that discussion. That's their expertise. It is not their expertise, botanicals and nutraceuticals. So push back. And there are some that have contraindications. So ask and understand and do your own research. And the answers likely live on this website called PubMed. So I would go and look at things like PubMed, which is actually, Jennie, you are the one who introduced this to me. Will you describe a little bit about how you use PubMed and what PubMed is?
Yeah, so PubMed is actually, I believe it's run by the National Institute of Health. But basically, it is documented studies, and they can be clinical studies, or they can be like the typical studies that we all talk about, like the double placebo, blah, 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 like all that stuff, right? But all of that information is well researched, and then it is placed inside of a database called PubMed, where it's public information. And the reason this is important for all of you to know is because our tax dollars actually pay for PubMed so that we have access to that information, those studies, those clinical experience, trials, whatever is on there. So you can very easily research information that's been well studied.
That's how I knew chemotherapy likely wouldn't work for me, because despite the fact that I had colon cancer, I was able to go on PubMed and find a research study that said lung cancer, a KRAS positive lung cancer, didn't work for platinum-based chemotherapy. So I knew I had to be skeptical because of what I read on PubMed. That is one of the biggest tools you have access to that very few people actually leverage. By using these resources, you can see the exact same data your doctor has access to. Journal of Clinical Oncology, oh yeah, read it. JAMA, yep, been on there too. Like, use those resources. Google and find, well, actually, I would say search, maybe not Google. So let's talk about that for just a minute. So some search engines are search engine optimized so that certain things come to the top, and they can hide other results. I pay for Mojo Health to come up when you Google holistic healthcare. That's real. I try and promote that so that you can find it easier. Other people search engine optimize lots of different things. So just know your results are bought and paid for on Google.
Yeah, you can actually put a little sponsor label underneath everything. Like if you Google, I don't know, frogs, right? There'll be something and it'll say sponsored. So I think, number one, I would carefully choose your search engine. My personal favorite is DuckDuckGo. Yes, they still have some of the same things that's bought and paid for. However, you can scroll farther. I would always scroll past your first page of information. The other thing too, you can click is the news button. right? Because then it'll populate anything within, I believe, 24 hours to 30 days. So if you're looking for something like triple negative breast cancer was my diagnosis, I can type in TNBC and then click the news button and see if anything pops up.
Yeah. Use those resources because they're out there, they're free, they're available, and they're easy to use. You just have to let your fingers do the walking, and you can gather this research to understand. And there will be things that you learn that you are like, that doesn't make sense, or I don't understand that, or things like that. That's the exact point, for you to question and to sometimes prove and sometimes disprove your hypothesis. That's exactly why we're doing this research. And I'm not saying that my doctor didn't say things that didn't change the way I did things. So I'll give you an example of, I had low iron when I started my cancer journey, and my oncologist was the one that said, why don't you try to take some vitamin C with it? And as soon as they did, it changed everything, and I could handle the iron. Now, I now take an iron supplement that has vitamin C already packaged with it through Natura, so I don't have to take both supplements separately. But like, that's the exact example. Sometimes your doctors know things because they've gone through experience and they can help you in these areas. But if he would have said, you can't take vitamin C with it, I would have said, that sounds weird. Just like your doctor said you shouldn't take antioxidants. There's a point where, let's be honest, your body needs vitamin C to live. If it needs vitamin C to live, why are we taking it away just because we're worried about cancer? Like, let's just have a little bit of that rational thought with it.
And I know it can be really difficult too, right? And, again, Julie and I are in sales. So I think we've always dealt with strong personalities, other strong personalities in our lives, right? Because if you're sitting at a negotiation table, you're obviously negotiating with someone who feels comfortable negotiating. But I think, it's okay. Like my doctor, for example, I love my oncologist. I really, really do. And I think he's willing to accept that I do things outside of his expertise. And he really, to be totally transparent, he doesn't really want to know. He's like, you look great, you look awesome, keep doing what you're doing and get out of my office, right? So he stays to his lane, and then he kind of I don't want to say lets me or allows me, but he knows I'm doing other things, and it is what it is. So a good example would be, I had read the Walter Longo study, about fasting and chemotherapy. Triple negative breast cancer is known to not actually respond very well to chemotherapy. So I was trying to think, if I have to do chemotherapy, I'm at this point, I want to do everything I can to make sure this chemotherapy works. Well, fasting for me was very compelling. And so my doctor, the day I was getting my infusion, my husband said, she's got a headache. Could we give her some extra fluids? Which was really smart of my husband to ask. And they said yes for my headache. And then the nurse said to me, well, why do you think you have a headache? I said, well, I started fasting 24 hours ago. So it's probably, lack of caffeine or food or something. And so she, of course, told my doctor she's fasting. So my oncologist came in and said, so tell me about this fasting stuff. What's going on with that? And I said, well, I had listened to this Walter Longo study, and I said, I'm happy to send it to you. And he was like, okay, whatever. Like at that point, what was he going to do? Right. Well, it turns out now that it's obvious the fasting actually did help the chemo to work, because I had an immediate response with my very first infusion of chemotherapy. So anyway, I think he just kind of said, okay, I'm just going to kind of let her do that. So you don't always have to have your doctor's approval, but that said, when I did that fasting, I didn't go rogue. I had a functional medicine doctor I talked to about doing it, and a friend who actually had worked under Dr. Nasha Winters, who had actually experienced fasting herself while doing chemotherapy, and it made hers more effective. So
I also fasted. I found it incredibly valuable in my toolbox. And my story would be icing. So when I was on oxaliplatin, you have cold sensitivity. So the cold sensitivity is so much that when you open your refrigerator or touch your counter or open your car door, you get shocked and you're miserable. You can't drink liquids. And I love cold water. And I know you're supposed to drink room temperature water, but let's be honest, I love a cold water every once in a while. So when that was one of the side effects I was really worried about. And so I said to my doctor, I want to ice. Because I'd done my research. I looked at my Facebook groups. I understood that people were saying if you ate ice chips and put your hands in ice and put your feet in ice, that you wouldn't have this cold sensitivity. And my nurse was like, no, nope, not considering it. You can't ice here. Nope, sorry. And I'm like, why? So I kept challenging. And I forced them to go get the oncologist, because I was like, no, I'm really worried about cold sensitivity. I'm going to push this. So the oncologist came in and he was like, you want to do what? I was like, they do this for breast cancer. I want to do this for colon cancer. It's for cold sensitivity. And I'm going to ice. And I'm going to put my hands in ice. I'm going to put my feet in ice. And I'm going to eat ice the whole time. And let's just see what happens. And he, by this point, knew me. and said, all right, if you want to be miserable, be miserable. We don't think it's going to do what you think it's going to do, but we don't think it's going to hurt you. But if you see these symptoms, you have to stop immediately. And I was like, understood. If I start doing this or this or this, I will no longer ice. That heard and understood. And so I iced, and I had no cold sensitivity. And now at that healthcare system, anyone can ice. So it takes one person to break the ice. It takes one person to challenge the assumption, one person to prove that you can do things a little differently and you can have different outcomes. So just keep pushing. When you have these things that you've heard other survival stories, you know these things work, you know it's outside the box. If the only thing you can risk is you, be willing to risk you for those moments, you know?
Yeah.
So.
And, I have a close friend who doesn't feel extremely comfortable having those conversations. And so, you know what she does? She leverages me. So I go with her to her appointments. And if there's something she's passionate about, she's researched something she wants to do that is somewhat questionable from a conventional medicine standpoint, she doesn't feel comfortable having that dialogue. I'm happy to have that dialogue as her advocate. So you can always find a loved one or a friend or someone who may be a little bit more comfortable asking questions. You can take them to your appointment. And by all means, be respectful. Your doctors, again, their goal is to kill the cancer. They really, really want to help you. They wouldn't do the job they do if they didn't want you to be healed. But also know that you care more about your health than anybody else. And if you feel very comfortable with something that you have well researched and you have some significant questions or some significant answers, maybe have someone go with you and have that discussion. So it's not all you.
I did bring an attorney with me to one of my appointments so that I could negotiate. Turns out I'm a better negotiator than an attorney. So I was like, oh, all right, move out of the way. I got this. But I did bring an attorney to my first appointment because I was like, I do think I need to have someone who can help me understand and who will listen and take notes. So, okay, let's go in. So do your research is our first major thing. There's lots of things we just described of how you can do research. It could be online groups. It could be survivor stories. It could be PubMed. It could be DuckDuckGo. Lots of ways. Build your team, do your research, understand the hypothesis and the questions and what you want to really understand in these conversations with your doctor. So yeah, I even try and I develop a hypothesis. So what is my hypothesis of what's going? So I have low iron. So for example, right now where I am, I've been able to rule out it's not cancer. I'm now working through 2 or 3 other hypotheses of what it is. And I've identified for each of those hypotheses, what's the data I can pull so I can prove or disprove if that's true. So that's where I would say, like, build your ideas of what this could be, and then try and pressure test what could you do to prove or disprove if that really could be it. Mm-hmm. Okay, so then the next thing I would say is I would send my doctor a note to let him know what the conversation was. I don't want to go in and surprise him. That's not the point. So I would like set an agenda and say, hey, I'm coming to my appointment on Wednesday. It's Sunday night. Here are the things I want to discuss. And here's the research I want to make sure you've seen before my conversation. So that way he's not coming in blind. I'm not coming in with a gotcha. You didn't say this research. No. I want them to know so that we can have an educated discussion. So I would try a couple days out to make sure I had my plan in place and I could prep them for the conversation.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. I'm guilty of sending my doctor studies that I've read about certain clinical trials that are going on, not even that apply to me, but something that I read during my research and was like, oh, if you have some patients, have you looked into this? And his response is always like, thank you so much for the information. I haven't heard about this, but I'm happy to read it. So you might be surprised. Your doctor, would probably find that endearing and responsible, showing that you're a responsible patient and you're playing a role in your healing.
Let's go back to our doctors are human beings. They went through an intensive medical school. They went through an intensive program where they learned how to be a specialist in whatever doctor they are. And now they're in the workforce and they're just like us, where their car breaks down and their kids need braces and this happens and they didn't get to eat, or this is, they're humans when they walk into work, just like any of the rest of us. They put on their pants one leg at a time, and then they get in work and they have more challenging questions. This is one of the most complex areas of our bodily function you can imagine. Most doctors are required to do 20, let me take that back. Every state is different. In my state, which is Georgia, a doctor in my state has to do 20 hours of continuing education credits a year. And we can put on in the show notes so that you can check for your doctor and what state they are. But it's really important for you to understand. So that means my doctor, there's 365 days a year, 24 hours in a day, 20 of those hours, they're being asked to focus on continuing education credits. So when you think about the fact that they only studied one of the toolboxes, pharmaceuticals, they don't know botanicals, nutraceuticals, diet, lifestyle, exercise, and all the other things. And they have 20 hours to stay up to speed. We're doing more research than ever before. So there's constant new targeted therapies and this and immunotherapy and this going on. And we expect them to know all of that and maintain their profitability metrics at work and maintain a life outside of work. Guys, we have to help them understand the research we want them to see. They are human beings with only so many hours in the day. They're not like reading research while they're sleeping. So it's physically impossible that they've looked at every single journal of clinical oncology and every single article on JAMA and every single article on PubMed. So help them. If you want them to see research, serve it to them in a kind and respectful way. But understand they don't know everything. They couldn't know everything because the research is coming so fast and furious. They're just trying to keep their heads above water, just like all the rest of us are.
Yeah, that is such a perfect explanation of exactly why we cannot hold our doctors accountable for information that they do not know.
Yeah.
Right? So again, if you know your doctor doesn't know everything, then you have to go and talk to other people that might be experts in any given area that's going to help you through your healing.
All right, Jennie, I haven't prepped you for this question, but let me just ask you, how many people do you see that advice you listen to? I know multiple oncologists.
Yeah, I have multiple oncologists. I have two general oncologists. One is in Texas and one is here at home. And then I also have a functional medicine doctor and his team, because it's not just my doctor there, it's another doctor there, it's a nurse practitioner there, it's the nurses that give me my high dose therapeutic IVs that are there. So there's a lot of information from that clinic that I can absorb as well as learn. And then I also go to Hope for Cancer. So I went there for 3 weeks and I continue to do follow-ups there in Mexico. So I have an integrative oncologist as well, which is Dr. Tony Jimenez, and my doctor at Hope for Cancer, Dr. Reina. I also have an internal medicine doctor, Dr. Simon Yu. And he was the one who actually started me off on my journey and learning that there were lots of reasons that my body probably was a great environment for cancer. So I had to tackle several things, including like some biological dentistry and things like that. So he's another person that I work with. And then, of course, we have Oscar at MOJO. So I'm about to start working with Oscar. Surprise, Oscar. I don't know if you knew that. I'm ready to talk to you. So, I've basically built a team, and I started from the very beginning knowing that I needed to build a team.
But you also were an expert in exercise already and knew how to move your body. You know what I'm saying? Like, you had a lot of advantages where you had some of these expertise already. And that's exactly what Jennie had just explained. I have 10 doctors and healers working on me, guys. It is not a one man show or me and my doctor. It is me and my doctor and my doctor and my doctor and my healer. And it is a group helping to make this consensus. And so I imagine I'm driving the VW bus, but all my doctors and healers are on that bus with me, all shouting out, hey, take a left here, backseat driving there. And that's exactly what you want. And when they disagree, that's good. We want to have that constructive tension so that we have to start to listen in, and there's an option here and there's a debate and there's a fork in the road. What do we want to listen to? This is what we want, what you want to achieve when you're facing something like stage 4 cancer.
Yeah. And those are kind of the doctors. When we say the word doctor, when I start talking about physicians and those types of things, that doesn't even include like my chiropractor, right?
Sure.
Which doctor of chiropractic, or your acupuncturist, or your massage therapist. Maybe you have an energy healer. Maybe you have a pastor at church who's guiding your spirituality. All of these things come into play for your healing. We are integrative bodies. We are made mind, body, and spirit. And so all of those different aspects of who we are important to address when it comes to our health.
Absolutely. Okay, now let's start to think about, okay, now we've done your research. And now you need to understand, in my opinion, when you're trying to do a negotiation or anything, any decision, what is your criteria? What matters to you? How are you going to prioritize the data you receive? And I think that's something you do outside of the research you've done. So for example, for me, it was, I want to live a long and healthy life long beyond this diagnosis. I want to live my very best life while I have this diagnosis. I want to make sure I'm doing everything I can to avoid a future diagnosis. And so I went through my decision criteria of how I'm going to make decisions. I was different because I don't have a family. I'm single. So I didn't have to worry about what my decisions would impact my children or my husband or other than workplace. But other than that, I was able to make my decision criteria really about my health. but your decision criteria might be you're a single mom and you got to make sure you can pick up your kid every day, or whatever it is. Know what the boundaries are that you need to live within and have that documented and thought through. So understand your decision criteria.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really important.
Yeah.
And it's different for all of us.
For sure. 100%. Every single person is going to have a different approach. Okay, now let's start to understand. You're going to ask your doctor questions. And my guess is, Jennie, when you asked your doctor questions, some of the times you understood what they said. And a lot of the times you didn't understand what they said. And so I would dumb it down and keep asking questions until I understood what they said. And it might be they say something and I'm like, sorry, guys, I'm smart, but I'm not that smart. So talk to me about what that word means, or define this in a different way. Can you say that in a different way? I kept asking until it made sense, until I could find someone that could bring it to the level in which I could understand what they were trying to tell me. And sometimes it took a couple times, and sometimes you felt like a real dumbass, but it was worth asking those follow-up questions to get to the end result. So Jennie, did you have a similar experience?
Yeah, all the time. Still do. Still do. Sometimes, they'll say something, I'll be like, wait, what?
Yeah.
So there's a couple tools though that I found very useful. One, it's always great to take another person with you because people hear things differently. And so I would take my mom, I would take my husband, I would take my girlfriend, I would take another cancer survivor. So that's always a great option. If you have that as a resource, I would use another person, which is great because sometimes they can understand what's being said. The other thing is I would hit record on my iPhone. I did, because there's so much discussion that happens and so much back and forth. Sometimes you forget that some things were said, and it's great to go back and be able to listen to those. I've also enjoyed going back and listening to those from, a year ago, they were basically saying like, Jennie, we can extend your life by 6 to 9 months. And here I am today with no disease. Right. So, sometimes that is just encouraging and inspiring. And, you can go back and say, okay, it was a long journey, but the outcome was awesome and it was all well worth it. The other thing is, yes, I would often ask my doctor to repeat him or herself. And if I still didn't understand, sending a follow-up email saying like, we talked about this, but I'm not quite sure I understand why you are suggesting this route. So you can always use that time. Your doctors, on average, I think it's 12 minutes. Is that, Julie, the data you've read? They spend.
Mine was actually less than that. I think it was 9 what I read. So it's less than 15. Let's just say, no matter what, less than 15.
Because they have, unfortunately, cancer is growing. Diagnosis of cancer is growing throughout the United States. So now these doctors have less time because they've got to move on to the next patient. So sometimes you might get the vibe that your doctor is frustrated, which happens, right? Because they're in a hurry. You're asking a lot of questions. They're trying to answer your questions as fast and as thoroughly as they can, but they know they have to move on to the next patient. So by all means, use your My Chart, your medical chart to communicate. You can also communicate with the nurse practitioners. I actually found one of my favorite people to bump up information against is my former nurse practitioner from the first time I was diagnosed. And I'm still in contact with him, and he's allowed me to bounce some questions off of him. But nurse practitioners tend to be research hounds, right? So sometimes you can send them something and they're ready to dig in. So you can also utilize those people on your team.
100%. Again, my nurse practitioner for my conventional medical approach is perhaps the most important person because she's the person I text with all the time. That's who I have that relationship with that I really truly love. So couldn't agree more. And I love the idea of recording. And I actually recorded a lot of my sessions as well and went back and listened when I wasn't sure, because you can't question your decision. So when I would want to, and I really did question, like when I was told to do chemo, so I would go back and listen to the conversation to feel confident that I made it right, the correct decision, because you can't repeat those. So I went back and used it a lot for like mental coaching as well to get through those moments of fear. So, okay, so let's talk about, I would go through when they would make a recommendation and I would start to ask some questions. What are the known side effects? What are the common side effects? What is the impact to my job? What's the impact to my family? How could this impact my overall survival? That last one was probably the one that few people ask, but it's really important because sometimes they'll recommend something like radiation because it'll help reduce your cancer. But radiation creates a whole bunch of other issues. So is it really worth it to do radiation? Is it really worth it to do chemo? Is it really worth it to do immunotherapy? All these things you got to challenge. And is it worth it to do in the schedule they're recommending? Because there's a standard of care that's built. So let's take a quick moment to back up. That's a word that most of you probably have heard. Let's walk through, how is a standard of care built? A standard of care is an approach that's a typical approach. It was studied. This was launched after Obamacare in 2009 was launched. And what they did was went through and to identify the most efficient way to treat cancer cells by many different diagnoses. And so when you think about efficient, that's not always effective, lack of side effects, greatest overall survival. Nope, that's not it. Efficient. So that could be cost efficient, that could be easy to deliver, that could be delivered within the profitability matrix that the hospital is using, that could be what your insurance will pay for. There's lots of things that can define what efficient is, but efficient to you and efficient to your healthcare system and doctor are probably different. Now, when your doctor wants to do something that is not the standard of care, so there's like a prescribed process in which they go. And if they don't want to follow the standard of care, typically there's a whole lot of red tape they got to jump through in order for your case to not do the prescribed process. So there's work that you're asking them to do on your behalf when you're not doing what you tell them to do. Which is why one of the big things I'd say here is don't be a jerk. Don't be miserable. Don't be hard. You're making them work harder for you. Do this in a way that you're making this a win-win, and they're explaining what you're doing, and they explain what your rationale, and they're behind you, even if it's not what they're saying out loud because it's the standard of care. Would you add anything to that, Jennie?
Yeah. I love that about being kind to your doctors, because we can be challenging, right? We're challenging their time, we're challenging their resources, we're challenging all these things, but as we should be. So just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, but we can do it with kindness and respect. And I will tell you that baked goods or nice little gifts for your nurses and your doctors are always wonderful things. They're always willing and excited to accept a gift from you, right? Because it shows that you've built a relationship with them, or you're building a relationship with them, and you care about what they have to say. I actually kind of giggle because I gave my oncologist the book Radical Remission. I mean, I choose my gifts poignantly.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we are challenging the norm, and I think what Julie said, that's something I just want to just talk about a little bit more. One thing is, to that standard of care, right? The doctors are doing that too. Like, for example, I asked for a specific blood work test, and the response was from my doctor, your insurance probably won't cover that. Well, I'm glad he said that, because that gave me the opportunity to say, I don't care if my insurance is going to cover that or not. How much is it out of pocket? And I'll find a way to pay for it, because that's a test that I really, really want. So sometimes those tests are available to them, and they're able to provide that information for you, or that data, but they typically won't offer it because it's not something that's under the standard of care, and it's typically not covered by your insurance.
I know both of us, the financial toxicity of cancer is so real. And I know we both face this. I mean, I just finished closing on my home equity line of credit so that I could continue my medical battles. Like, it is true. This is not cheap. This is not easy. And what insurance covers is what is basic and known and approved by the FDA. What I use to heal is way more than basic, well known by conventional and approved by FDA. And in fact, supplements aren't approved by FDA. Diet's not approved by FDA. Lifestyle's not approved by FDA. Sleep's not approved by FDA. All those things are important. All those things add up. Organic food costs money. All this thing is real. So the financial toxicity is absolutely appropriate. The tests that unlocked my future were not paid for by insurance. So don't be afraid to dig into your savings, or to get a home equity line of credit, or to take a loan out, or to put some debt on your credit card so that you can get data to unlock your picture. That's real. That happens.
Fundraisers, your church, your community, your friends, people want to help. That's the one thing too, right? That I learned. And if you let them help, they feel a participant in your healing, which is a blessing to them. So don't be scared to ask.
Yeah. So I think the other part of this is be vulnerable and authentic. And so part of my discussion with my oncologist when we were talking through chemotherapy the first time, I was like, I'm scared. I don't want to do chemo. I don't think it's the right drug. And he's like, why? And I was like, I don't want a port. And for me, I didn't want a port because I was scared of it, because a former family member had one, and it wasn't really put in right, and they were always uncomfortable. And I was like, no, I don't want it. And to me, that was like the sign I was really sick. And so for me, a port was like scary. So he's like, okay, there's an option B, and we can do a chemo that doesn't require a port. And by being authentic and vulnerable and not being difficult, we were able to find a solution that worked for me. And the chemo didn't work anyway, so it didn't really matter for me anyway. But the fact that I didn't get a port to get chemo that I didn't want, and like all of this matters. So if there's a concern, and everyone under the moon was like, ports aren't anything to be scared about, Julie. This is an irrational fear. It's fine. You're okay. But it doesn't matter. It's irrational. It was my fear. And so let's just not touch that fear and figure out if there's an option B that we can pivot and jive to, that we can avoid that fear. So be vulnerable and open with what you're feeling as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The same thing applies to your decision making, right? So, I didn't want to have chemo. I didn't. I had already had it once and my cancer came back. One thing I want to note too is when we start talking about prognosis, like what does it look like for me, right? Number one, be careful because your doctors are not God and they can't dictate what's going to happen to you. Okay. So they may have a data set that they're looking at that says, okay, on average, you might live 3 years, right? I would just rebuke that information. I mean, it's fine as information, use it as information, but that doesn't mean that's what's going to happen to you. So that's number one. Number two is when we start talking about cancer and we start talking about prognosis, one data point that's really interesting is they only look 5 years out. That data is that patient, their whatever treatment they did 5 years out. Guys, my cancer did not come back until year 7. So, and actually, the data says if I exceeded 3 years without a recurrence, the chances were very slim that my cancer was come back. And the second time they found me with cancer, it was stage 4. So 7 years later, well, guess what? That 5 years shows that I went cancer free. So that's the data. The data was I was cancer free, right? So technically, kind of the word cured, except year 7 it came back. So I think too, we have to be careful how we look at that information because it's how the data is pulled, right? We can only follow them for so long. And then I forgot I was going to say something else, but I've lost it.
That was when I saw that overall survival was 5 years. I was like, I'm not 50 yet. Are you kidding me? Like, no. I mean, not like 5 years times 10. Like, no. We're shooting for 50 years. Yeah. So that was a big moment in time. And the other part with the data is that's doing it their way.
Right.
That's not doing it your way. So that's totally different,
That's 100%. And that's exactly the way I think about it, even today, is that, I'm doing all of these things. So I am outside of this normal data set. There is no data set that says if you do high dose IV vitamin C every week for a year, right? There's no information out there that says that. So I think we do have to take into consideration that we are unique, each one of us. Our lifestyles are unique, our diets are unique, our emotions are unique, our feelings are unique. Like there's so much at play. And that's why I really believe that cancer is such a complexity because there are so many things that can play a part, good or bad.
100%. I know so I think we've gone through a lot of the steps to negotiation, from looking at research to making sure that you set an agenda, to making sure you have a hypothesis, to making sure you have someone with you or you record your session, to making sure you challenge, to ask questions to get to the point. I think the other thing I want to leave you with is or think about is understand the funding sources of your research. So I was going to a lot of online cancer groups on Facebook. And anytime I would discuss anything that wasn't FDA approved, my post would be deleted.
Same.
So when I started to do this, and I was like, why are you, I'm asking about, curcumin, or I'm asking about like vitamin C, or I'm asking about something that's innocuous, or St. John's, or something ridiculously crazy and small. Like, why would you be deleting this? Or I'm talking about how I exercise or fasting, whatever it was. If it wasn't FDA approved, it would be deleted. So I challenged this. And I went to the board and I was like, what the hell is going on? Why are you deleting all these things? And they're like, if you look at our rules, it says that everything that's discussed has to be approved by FDA. And so I looked at their sponsors and realized they were sponsored by pharmaceutical organizations and the American Cancer Society. Even the American Cancer Society is sponsored by pharmaceutical organizations. So look at your funding sources to understand the research and why they're not discussing any of the other toolboxes, and understand how capitalism has shaped our healthcare system. It is much more than just, we don't know this data. This isn't the data that we're even considering using because it's not FDA approved and things like that. So anyway, I just want to make sure you understand that funding sources shift the availability of data and what people are talking about.
Yeah, that's right. And I think too, don't get me wrong, Facebook groups are wonderful. It's a great place to have open dialogue and conversation. Again, I've experienced the same thing as you have too, Julie. And I also too would be very cognizant of even from patients or survivors or anybody who has an experience. Listen, you want to feed your mind with positive encouraging, inspiring, motivational stories. And there are some very sad stories out there in relation to cancer, and it breaks my heart. But if you have been diagnosed with cancer and you are on those Facebook groups, one of those things I really need you to remember is that the people that have gone on that are doing well and living their lives are not on that Facebook page complaining about all the things that have gone wrong. So as sad as I am to hear about all these awful things that have gone wrong, I just want to put it in perspective. That is not the collective total. So we just have to be sometimes very careful and discerning on the information that we read out there.
Oh, I love that so much, Jennie, because I know both of us are joy maximizers and pimpers, or pimpers of joy, I should say. And I think that we both surrounded ourselves by making sure that we had real data, but we weren't feeding ourselves emotional drama that couldn't help us. And then the worst of the worst, and then the drama swirl. No, I had no energy for it. So I would simply just remove myself from that. I'm there to understand the research and have real discussion. So I love that perspective and feedback as well. What else would you say is important from a negotiation perspective for our listeners?
Gosh, negotiation is exactly what you're doing, because you are negotiating your plan and your strategy. But when you come to that conversation, I would treat it like a conversation, treat it like a discussion. You might be negotiating, right, from your perspective, if you have an idea, a hypothesis, and a strategy that you would like to embrace and follow. But your doctor doesn't really feel like he's negotiating or she's negotiating, right? Because they have the standard of care. So there is no negotiation. So I would just say, listening is really important. Number one, it shows a sign of respect for what they do. Number two, it shows that you care about what they have to say, because the information they do have is very, very important for you to understand and digest. And then the other piece is, by listening, you also can discern what they're not saying, which gives you some opportunity to have a discussion about some things that you might want to do or some things that you're interested in doing, and then get their feedback. The other piece of that is, their feedback is not the gospel. Their feedback is their feedback based on their education and their clinical experience. And I think asking that question sometimes is really, really important. One of my oncologists has suggested a treatment that I am currently doing, and it is not based on any official clinical study. It is based on her clinical experience. And I made sure I understood that. Is this based on a study? Is this based on several studies? Or is this based on your personal experience within your clinic? Sometimes clinical experience, guys, that can be really, really important. Sometimes that clinical experience may not be the best thing for you. So make sure you understand where that information is coming from. That's the other piece.
100%. I think I was able to balloon out a little bit and treat this like a discussion. As you said, go with an agenda. Make sure I have my research out there. Make sure I have I'm walking into this discussion understanding what we're doing. This isn't every meeting with my doctor. A lot of times we're just in there to check and make sure things we're doing blood tests, you're good, you're going to an infusion, go ahead. But it's when you're making big decisions, when you have a fork in the road, that's where these skills are really going to help you understand and make sure that what you're doing is what you want to do. Because when I'm doing what my doctor wants to do, my heart's not in it. My body's not in it. My soul's not in it. The chance of it actually healing are not high. Jennie, we both had command and control over what we were doing. We both woke up every day with a sense of purpose, and we ate the right diet, and we did the right activities, and we chose the right things for our body, and we moved the right way, and we invested our energy appropriately. We did the work. And that's the part of this of, you are in control. You are the driver. You're responsible for the outcomes. Your doctor's guiding you. Make sure you understand your role and their role, and make sure you're doing everything you can to ensure success.
Yeah. I mean, there are some significant studies, and I do believe in the book Radical Remission by Kelly Turner. She does talk about it. If you are not on board with your treatment plan, there is a likelihood your treatment plan will not work, because your body is going to react to the way you feel about what you're doing. So I think, once you make a decision, follow your journey, right? Like, do the things, whatever that is for you. It makes sense. If someone tells you not to do chemo, but you really feel like you should, by all means, do chemo. If you feel like you shouldn't and they're telling you you should, by all means don't. It is completely 100% up to you. And I know that seems like a burden of responsibility, but once you understand it more from a bigger perspective and you're well researched and you understand, you trust me, you will have confidence and you will have peace in the decisions that you make. And if you follow your instinct, your gut, based on your research and your information and what you've discussed with other survivors or wherever it is that you feel comfortable, you have a better chance of a more positive outcome if you are on board.
It took me throwing theme parties at my infusions to get on board with having an infusion. Whatever it takes for you to be good with it, do it. Because that's exactly right. You have to know that you're there doing the right thing and that you're in the right place at the right time, doing the right things to help you heal your body. And if you don't think that's right, make sure you're figuring out what you're doing and pivoting to get to the point where you're doing the right things at the right time to make the right things happen with your body, because our spiritual alignment is really valuable here. So.
And I know it sounds like a lot, Julie. We were talking about a lot of things that we did, right? We literally changed every single thing in our lives. And I know it seems like a lot and it can come across as overwhelming, but I promise you that if you commit to what you believe in doing is going to help you heal, all of those things kind of become a luxury to some extent, right? You're like, I'm doing this because it's going to make me better. I'm going for this walk because it's good for my mental and my physical health. I'm going to eat this diet because, gosh, holy moly, after 2 weeks of eating this way, I feel like a completely different person. So at first, this change may seem difficult, but eventually what happens is you start to embrace and enjoy those changes because the person that you become in making those changes and doing all the things make you feel so much better. And I would never thank cancer. I would never, ever thank cancer. But I tell you what, everything that I have learned from it and the journey through it has made me a way more exciting person. That's for sure.
I think I actually would thank cancer because it's helped me understand what matters in my life and what doesn't matter and who matters and how I'm going to invest my energy and like my whole prioritization and what I do. And you're right. It is a lot of change when you start this. And it's scary. And you think, how can I do it? And French fries matter more. And how could I ever give up French fries or ice cream? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. None of it matters. Yeah. That's the truth of the matter. Is when cancer told me very clear what matters and what doesn't matter. So am I grateful for cancer? I am. Do I wish it happened? No. But am I grateful for it? No. I took that opportunity and I leveraged it so that I could figure out how to heal. Yeah. So anyhow, all right. Well, for those of you listening, we hope that this helped. You have 2 women who are on the line who have done it. They've proven that you can challenge respectfully. My healthcare team loves me. I love them. I would do anything for them. I know, Jennie, when you walk in that office, nobody's sad you're there.
We have fun.
We have fun. Yeah, that's exactly right. I might get dressed up in costume and give you gifts, but we're going to have fun together. I might be your worst and most challenging patient of the day, but at the end of the day, we're going to give each other hugs and love each other because that's the relationship you should create. And if you can't create that relationship, you do need to do a different team. So I would say I've recorded a couple podcasts, one with Meredith Kirk, said nurse practitioner who I love so much, one with Dr. Chad Levitt, a 20-year veteran oncologist. Both of them have talked about what you should be looking for in a doctor. So go back and listen to those podcasts so that you understand and make sure that you are surrounded by the very best team possible.
That's right. And don't be fooled. The things that you do rub off on other people, right? And whether that's you're doing something joyful and you're spreading joy like Julie did with her infusions and her infusion parties. And I've even had my nurses say to me, hey, by the way, do you mind if I tell this other patient to follow your Instagram? It's so inspiring. It's so encouraging. And there's some really good information that they could probably do. You would be surprised the effect you have on not only your medical team, but also the other people and the other patients that are with that medical team. So listen, all of these things can be used for good. They really, really can. And I think you'll be surprised. You're totally worth it. You're more than enough. You're loved. And what you go through during this journey is going to be important to you, your family, but also to the people around you.
I laugh because now they sit me next to the people who are in the most miserable place and sick and awful and all this. And sometimes I bring my dog, and we're like, yeah, let's hang out and have this emotional support animal and like snuggle and all the things, because that's exactly right. When we surround ourselves with awesome, we are awesome. When we surround ourselves with misery, we are misery. So yes. All right, everyone. Jennie, I can't thank you enough for joining me. Thank you for helping to drop your experience and knowledge bombs on our listeners to help everyone who follows in our wake.
Well, thank you, Julie, for everything you're doing. We're all benefiting from these conversations. I just love it.
Me too. Well, and to all of our listeners, may you live long and lucky. You are the champion of your journey. You are your hero. No one is going to ride in their white cape to make sure this happens. You got it though. And if you listen to what we're sharing and the support tools and everything that Mojo Health is delivering for you, you will sail through this experience if you are confident in your healing approach. So without any further ado, go forth and live your best life. May you live long and lucky, and we hope you will turn in again.